All right, what's up, everybody? It's your boy, uberhikari, a.k.a. the nerd nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. It's time to do what y'all came here for, baby. First review, first anime or manga related review that's going up on the Uber Hikari YouTube channel. But before I get into that, let me just take a minute to discuss my man Otaku Assemble. Oh man, if you haven't heard by now, if you haven't heard yet, um, me and Otaku Assemble did a video collab where we did our likes and dislikes of Rurouni Kenshin that just went up on his channel yesterday. Since I have been planning to do my first review as Rurouni Kenshin, and since I heard that Assemble was doing October, having October as Samurai Month, I figured why not get together with the Otaku Assemble, one of the most well-respected members of the YouTube anime community, and put together a video collaboration, and so that's what we decided to do. Um, One word, epic. So if you haven't seen that video, go and check out that video collaboration that I did with Otaku Assemble. I will be posting that video link in the description box below. All right, so Rurouni Kenshin, like I've been saying, my favorite shonen manga, and as far as I can tell, the best shonen manga that's ever been written. Yes, the best. You heard it here on Uber Hikari's YouTube channel first. All right, so just to give you a little quick idea of what's going to be happening in this video, first I'm going to give you a little brief summary of what the storyline's about, and then I want the discussion of this video to revolve really around two topics. The first topic is this relationship between power, violence, and psychological stability. That's really a recurring theme throughout this manga. So I'm going to be talking about important characters and how they became corrupted by violence and how that really affected their psychological stability and the importance of that for the progression of the storyline in the manga. The other thing that I want to discuss is this idea of atonement and redemption that keeps coming back for Kenshin Himura as he tries to create a new life where he doesn't have to revert to the manslayer within himself in order to protect people. So here we go. Uh, Kenshin Himura. Of course, I gotta start off with my man Kenshin Himura. Actually, first, just forgot. Let me do that brief summary first. Um, so Rurouni Kenshin. Rurouni Kenshin is about a man named Kenshin Himura, who was an assassin during this sort of a period of civil unrest and strife in Japan that's known as the Bakumatsu, where people who wanted to institute a democratic government in a Western style government faced off against the Tokugawa shogunate, who were the emperors of Japan. And so Kenshin sees the fighting that's going on during that period, and he wants to try and use the skills that he's learned as a swordsman with the Hiten Mitsurugi style of swordsmanship to create an era of peace that he says where people can live in peace. And so the story, we get to the point in the story where it's the 11th year of the Meiji government, and this is the government that Kenshin has helped create. And now he's going through a lot of psychological turmoil because he has to sort of come to terms with all the assassinations that he did as a manslayer, and he's on a psychological journey for atonement and for redemption. So Rurouni Kenshin is really a story that's driven by the psychological journey that Kenshin has to take in order to get to the answer of how to atone for the crimes that he's committed as a hitokiri or a manslayer. So first, let's discuss this theme of violence and corruption and psychological stability in terms of Kenshin Himura's character in the story. The first thing is the relationship between um, his mindset or his psychology or his consciousness and his sakabato. The sakabato is a very important symbol throughout this series because in a lot of ways it is the physical manifestation of his consciousness, and you can really see that because he really has two options with the sakabato. One option is that he can, continue to revert to the manslayer that he was during the Bakumatsu, and that will lead to inevitably lead to his sort of psychological corruption and his psychological breakdown. Or he can take the other path that the Sakabato represents, and that is the path of not killing anyone and finding new ways to try and protect people without having to take life. And so that is the path of moral responsibility and moral atonement that he can take. One of the most important scenes involving the Sakabato is the first fight that he has with Seta Sojiro. Remember, Kenshin is on his way to Kyoto, but before he gets there, he stumbles upon this town that Shishio has taken over. And within that town, Shishio is really he's murdered this boy's family, his mother, his father, and his brother. And Kenshin goes to the town and he confronts Shishio about what he's doing. And Shishio takes one look at him. He says, I'm not going to fight you. Before that, however, he does fight Senkaku and defeats Senkaku. But Shishio tells him, I don't want to fight you as you are. You're a weakling to me. And so Kenshin has to face off against Seta Sojiro, who is one of Shishio's henchmen, the top person in the Jupan Gantana, Shishio's sort of mercenary or little band or little gang that he's put together. So Kenshin faces off against Eda Sojiro, and they take their stances, and it's a test of who has the better bato jutsu. Bato jutsu meaning who has the better technique with the sword release, and so they face off, and it winds up that it's a draw because um, uh Kenshin's Sakabato is like, the tip of the Sakabato is like completely cut off, making the sword almost useless. And Seta Sojiro's sword is like, fragmented and broken from the duel. And we really see how the breaking of the Sakabato represents or symbolizes the potential for Kenshin to return to the manslayer that he was. So that's a very important scene in the manga and a very important symbol for Kenshin. So Kenshin has to go to his master. He has to go to Hiko Seijiro and learn the succession technique so that he will be strong enough to fight Shishio without having to return to Batosai the Manslayer. So during this time that he learns the succession technique, um, he has to go through that. We understand that it's both a physical training where he has to train with Hiko Seijiro, and we understand that it's a sort of spiritual or psychological rehab. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Right before Kenshin has to, do the succession technique, because remember, Hiko Seijiro's taught him Kuzuryusen, which is a 9-point attack that, attacks all the vulnerable points of a swordsman simultaneously. So Kenshin has to find a way to defeat this 9-point simultaneous attack. And um Hiko Seijiro is coming towards him and he's saying, you have to use the succession technique to beat me, and the only way to do that is to have a technique that surpasses the Godspeed of Hiten Mitsurugi. And so Hiko Seijiro is coming towards him, and the name of the chapter is Life and Death. And if you remember, or I believe it's between life and death. And right before Hiko Seijiro attacks him, Kenshin is saying to himself, I have to learn the secrets of this succession technique. I have to learn this ultimate technique, even if it means my death. And right before Seijiro attacks him, he has an epiphany and he realizes that he can't die. He can't die even if he's trying to learn the succession technique, because if he dies, then he won't be able to protect the people that he loves. And he thinks about Kaoru, and he thinks about Yahiko, and he thinks about Sanosuke and all of his other friends. And he learns that there's a new power within him, a power that's derived not from reverting to the manslayer and not from throwing his life away, like he had previously been doing, but he learns that there's a new power inside of him that's derived from the will to live, so that he can live and protect the people that he loves. And so that is really important symbolism within the manga, because it shows the psychological transition that he has to make. The transition from A, reverting to the manslayer and throwing his life away in battle and embracing death, and B, making the transition to deriving his power from his will to live rather than death, so that he can stay alive and protect the people that he loves. And so that is a really important scene within the manga. So uh, and another important instance of this sort of psychological turmoil that he goes through is also in the scene with Tomoe. Um, Remember, Kenshin is an assassin, and he's so terrorized and so traumatized by what he's done, that he can't sleep in front of other people. And then Tomoe, who was revealed to be his wife later on in the storyline, um, she sort of, well, she wasn't his wife at this time, but she goes to bring him a blanket while he's sleeping. And Kenshin is startled awake, and before he can control himself, he sort of takes his sword out of the sheath, and he almost kills Tomoe. And Tomoe sees that he's so overwhelmed by being an assassin, that she tells him, let me be the sheath to your sword. And so that, I just thought that was a very beautiful metaphor, and that shows the how the relationship between Tomoe and Kenshin sort of blossomed in this organic fashion. So that's another instance of him trying to overcome the manslayer. Although during that time he eventually, even though he eventually fails during that time with Tomoe, and that's part of the tragedy of the story. But I really, really love this whole dynamic between Hiko Seijiro passing down the Amakakaru Ryu no Hirameki to Kenshin. And you really get to see the relationship between Hiko Seijiro and Kenshin Himura, because Hiko Seijiro kind of stands in as that father figure. And he's trying to teach him, while he's teaching him about the succession technique. He's also trying to teach him about moral responsibility. Because remember, Hiko Seijiro is stronger than Kenshin. This is clear because Kenshin, was training with Hiko Seijiro, and he couldn't even land an attack. So it's quite clear from the manga that Hiko Seijiro can beat Makoto Shishio, but he elects not to, because he's trying to teach Kenshin how to be a man, and to solve his own problems, and to sort of take moral responsibility for what he's done, because Kenshin's friends are the ones who created Makoto Shishio. So and you really get to see Hiko Seijiro, play that father figure role. Um, and another thing that we see is that Hiko Seijiro really teaches Kenshin how to live on his own terms, how to live on his own standards. And that's really what being a man is all about. Because Hiko Seijiro tells Kenshin Himura, he tells him that no matter how you try and dress it up, swordsmanship is swords are a tools for death, and Kenjutsu is the art of killing. And even though it seems like Seijiro believes this, he still tries to help Kenshin find a way to become more powerful without having to revert to the manslayer within him. And so I thought that relationship was just really touching, and I really like how Hiko Seijiro stands in as the sort of father figure for Kenshin Himura. All right, so now let's talk about the antagonist of Rurouni Kenshin. So first, let me discuss what an antagonist is. Um, there are really multiple sorts of archetypes for the antagonist. One archetype for the antagonist is the sort of, villain or OP villain. Think people who want, world domination or who want power. So think Frieza or somebody like Madara Uchiha or Aizen Sosuke. Another type of villain is the sort of more ethically complex villain, the sort of justifiable villain. So think of people where you agree with them, maybe you agree with the ends that they're trying to achieve, but not with the methods that they use. So think about Shar Aznable and Shar's counterattack, or think about who's another? Oh, Sensui is a great example from Yu Yu Hakusho of the sort of justifiable antagonist or justifiable villain. The third sort of antagonist is the more psychologically complex antagonist or villain. So think about the revenge antagonist, somebody like Scar in Full Metal Alchemist. Or think about somebody who's really been traumatized by the things that they've had to go through. So think Vegeta. And so that one of the strengths of this manga and one of the strengths of Watsuki Nobuhiro, who's the mangaka of this manga, is that he really illustrates the psychological complexity of the antagonist. And so you get multiple antagonists throughout Rurouni Kenshin who really exemplify all of the types of antagonistic archetypes that I've just listed. One of those characters is, of course, Aoshi Shinomori. Wow. Aoshi Shinomori. So Aoshi Shinomori is the leader of the Oni Wabanshu, which is a kind of spy group who was also a part of the Bakumatsu. But they really didn't get a chance to fight. And this really haunts Aoshi Shinomori because he always wanted the Oni Wabanshu to be known as the sort of the best, as he calls it, and he wants to lay that honor on their grave. So Kenshin first meets Aoshi Shinomori in the I keep forgetting her name, Megumi Takani, I believe is her name, in that arc where Aoshi Shinomori is kind of fallen from his glory days as a leader of the spy group. Although the Oniwabanshu is still together, and he's sort of allied with this drug dealer, and Kenshin has to beat him in order to save Megumi Takani from basically being a slave to this real scumbag guy, Conryu Takeda. And so what I'm not going to give away too many spoilers, but basically what happens is that everybody in that group sort of in the Oniwaban shoe is killed by Kanryu Takeda. And this really it basically drives Aoshi Shinomori insane, and he becomes obsessed with hunting down Kenshin Himura. And so you can really see the theme of violence and corruption and psychological instability in Aoshi Shinomori, because he becomes corrupted by his obsession with killing Kenshin Himura so that he can lay the honor of the strongest down on the graves of his fellow comrades who have fallen. And so what basically happens is he dishonors their in a way, instead of having good memories of the Oniwabanshu. What happens is he turns the memory of his fallen comrades into sort of ghosts that haunt him, and that fuel his quest for violence and for vengeance. And so it really messes him up psychologically. My favorite antagonist in Rurouni Kenshin, and my favorite character in Rurouni Kenshin is, of course, Makoto Shishio, one of the most psychologically and, in a sense, ethically complex antagonists in that manga, and really in all of shonen manga ever. So one of the things that we have to remember when we think about the role that Makoto Shishio plays in this manga is that this is really a historical manga. And so basically what Watsuki Nobuhiro has to do is he has to create a character in a time period with all the psychological traits that would be realistic for this character to have during that time period. And so Makoto Shishio really plays the part um, of symbolizing the transition to Japanese nationalism and also Japanese imperialism. Because remember, this manga takes place during the year 1878. And the imperialist expansion of Europe is really kicking into high gear at this point. And this is right around the time in 1888 where the European powers are just about to carve up Africa, which is known as the Scramble for Africa. And so, um, uh, like I said, Makoto Shishio really plays the historical role of the fanatical Japanese nationalist and at the reflection of imperialism within Japan, within Japanese political culture at that time. And Makoto Shishio is, like I said, he's a really interesting person, and Watsuki Nobuhiro does an excellent job of creating Makoto Shishio. He gives him very complex motives, both internally, because we see that he's motivated by a desire to have a stronger Japan that can assert itself on the international stage and won't be bullied by the European powers. And so, in some sense, we sympathize with the Makoto Shishio, even though we realize that yes, he is a little crazy, that his methods are really horrible. But we really sympathize with him because we understand that he really wants what he thinks is the best for Japan, especially since he understands how corrupt the Meiji government is. Because right after he ends his life as an assassin in the Bakumatsu, the Meiji government turned on him and sort of, and they, literally set him on fire, although he survived. So we can see that he's one of the traditional justifiable villains or antagonists. Um, and he's also given complex external motives because he's really driven by the historical circumstances of the time period in which he lives, because like I said, this is right around the time when the European powers are expanding through colonialism and imperialism. And so we really get to see the theme of power and violence and corruption, and in this case not just psychological instability but insanity. I mean, Makoto Shishio winds up really going insane by the time the Kyoto story arc is finished. So basically, what happens is, since he was burned, they tried to burn him to death. The sweat glands all over his body were destroyed, and so he can't regulate his internal body temperature. So whenever he engages in a really rigorous activity, his body temperature goes up. And what happened in the manga is that he, sort of spontaneously combusted, bursted into flames. But the crazy thing about that scene is that when he burst into flames, this guy is laughing, right? Hysterically laughing. And so that just symbolizes the ways in which his violence literally consumes him to the point of making him laugh, even though he's being, burned alive. And of course, the irony is not lost on us, right? Because the Meiji government tried to burn him to death, and here, when he's facing Kenshin, he winds up burning himself to death through his quest for vengeance and through his quest for violence. One of the ironic things about the character of Makoto Shishio rather, is that even though he loses that fight to Kenshin, historically speaking, it was precisely people like Makoto Shishio who actually won the day in Japan, because eventually Japan did become nationalist, very nationalist, and it did become a sort of imperialist power in the East. Uh, Another antagonist, major antagonist, of course, is Yukishiro Inishi. Excuse me. Again, who really sort of, is again a variation of this theme of, violence and corruption and power, and the relationship between that and psychological instability. Yukishiro Inishi was is Kenshin's brother-in-law. He was Tomoe's sister, and I won't reveal any spoilers about exactly, well, I guess I have to, reveal the spoiler. Basically, what happens is Kenshin and Tomoe, they got married during that time in the Bakamatsu, and I won't reveal the whole backstory of that, but Kenshin somehow accidentally winds up killing Tomoe, and so Yukishiro Inishi comes back to exact vengeance on Kenshin, and again, he's also one of these antagonists or villains who is again psychologically complex and ethically complex because what he wants is to punish Kenshin for all that he's done as a manslayer. And that's why this story arc is named the Jinshu arc. In Japan, in addition to the Western idea of justice, justice is something dispensed by the state in society. They also have two other different notions of justice. The first is Tenshu, and the literal translation of Tenshu is heaven's punishment. So Tenshu means that it's the justice of the gods. It's the punishment that the gods will exact upon you when you do something that they frown upon. And Jinshu is kind of the flip side of the coin. The literal translation of Jinshu is earthly punishment. And so Jinshu means that even if the gods don't exact retribution on you, that humans, Jin, the word in Jinshu, is the kanji for person or people. It means that even if the gods don't exact punishment on you, that humans will take up that task instead of the gods, and they will exact punishment on you. And so we get to see another variation of the psychologically and ethically complex antagonist or villain in that manga, because Yukishiro Inishi, um, in some ways he is justified, right? Because Kenshin did kill Tomoe, even if he did it accidentally. But he also represents the sort of revenge antagonist, because he's coming back against Kenshin to make him pay for the crimes that he's committed as a manslayer. And one of the and so he gets consumed by violence and revenge again, another character like that. And so the way in which we see this is really, ugh, really in a really disgusting way. So Yukishiro Inishi, first of all, he whoops Kenshin's ass with that Wato Jutsu. I mean, we can't overlook that. That was a serious ass whooping that he put on Kenshin Himura. But he has this ability that's called the nerves of insanity, and so we get to see how how his body becomes sort of a physical manifestation or a physical way of illustrating his mental insanity. And so Kenshin, that move basically allows Yukishiro Inishi to enhance his nerves, to make him more sensitive to the movements around him, and to really take his body to the extreme. So make him faster, make him more perceptive, and that sort of thing. And Kenshin attacks Yukishiro Inishi by using the Ryu Mei Sen, which is he closes his sword into a sheath really fast, and it creates a supersonic sound. And because Yukishiro Inishi's hearing is so magnified, it messes up his hearing. But what Yukishiro Inishi is so overcome by violence. I believe Hajime Saito said that his spirit has gone beyond his body. What he does is really crazy. His eardrums are messed up. So what he does is he reaches inside his ear and rips out his eardrums. I mean, this guy is really, really crazy and really exemplifies that theme of corruption and violence and psychological instability. What's really interesting about this relationship between Kenshin Himura and Yukishiro Inishi is this sort of irony. It seems like Inishi is only justified if we believe that Kenshin is morally responsible for Tomoe's death. Now, in the manga, the Tomoe's death is depicted as an accident. Actually, she's trying to protect Kenshin, and Kenshin senses he's been in a fight, so he's really badly beat up. They did a lot of things to him where he can't hear, he can't see, and so his senses are really messed up. And Tomoe is trying to protect Kenshin, and so she jumps in front of the guy who's about to attack Kenshin. And Kenshin, when he goes to swing his sword, he cuts through her, and he cuts down his opponent. But in doing so, he accidentally kills Tomoe. So it seems like um, we can only believe that Yukishiro Inishi exemplifies a justified antagonist if only if Kenshin is morally responsible for Tomoe's death. But we have to realize that Kenshin did a lot of other horrible things as an assassin. Part of how he got that scar is that he was fighting a man who was just getting was just about to be married and about to start a family, and then Kenshin comes and he assassinates this guy. And the guy is, after Kenshin cuts him up, he's on the ground and he's begging for his life. And he's telling Kenshin, you can't kill me. I just married a beautiful woman, and I want to start a family with her. And Kenshin, walks over to him. Well, first he comes at Kenshin with such vigor that he manages to cut Kenshin, which is really unprecedented because Kenshin is like the top sword fighter of the Bakumatsu. And the guy is laying on the ground, and Kenshin walks over to him. He stands over him and he stabs him through his neck. And so we have to realize that even if Yukishiro Inishi may be wrong in trying to get to punish Kenshin for killing Tomoe, Kenshin is really responsible for a lot of other gruesome things as a manslayer during the Bakumatsu. So but let's since we're on this discussion of Kenshin and moral responsibility and the crimes that he's committed as a manslayer, let's talk about the last topic that I sort of want to discuss in this manga review, and that's the topic of justice, atonement, and moral responsibility. So basically, I won't, trying to stay away from spoilers as much as I can. But basically, Yukishiro Inishi does something horrible to Kenshin, and it really, really breaks his spirit. And so he's in the broken down section of town, and he's basically lost his will to fight, and he's chained his Sakabato shut. So that's a very important symbolism because, like I said, that Sakabato, that reverse blade sword, is really the physical manifestation of his consciousness, and for him to seal away the Sakabato by chaining it into its sheath is really like Kenshin sealing away his soul. First, let me say that the artwork that depicts this sort of this part of the manga, this part of the manga where Kenshin's in the broken down section of town, and where he finally gets his answer about how to atone for the crimes that he's committed as a manslayer. The artwork in this chapter, I believe it's chapter 224, is really, really beautiful. If you want to see artwork that really combines the skill of artistry and the skill of using words, to create symbolic meaning. This chapter, you can't get much better than this chapter, and not just in the shonen genre, but in all of manga, period. Watsuki Nobuhiro is a sensei, really a sensei. Bow my head to Watsuki Nobuhiro. Um, Really awesome. I mean, you can really see the color is sort of drained out of Kenshin's eyes. When we see a close up of Kenshin, and the artwork is just really amazing. And so this is the beginning, chapter 224, called Shinjitsu, which in Japanese means reality or truth. So this is the sort of the beginning of the end of Kenshin's psychological journey. The Kyoto arc is, Kenshin learning the first part of Kenshin's psychological journey, where he learns how to dig inside of himself and access power that's based on his will to live, through his desire to protect other people rather than having to rely on the manslayer within him. And this is the part of the manga where he sort of completes that psychological journey, where he now is trying to gain an answer for how to atone for his sins as a manslayer and as a hitokiri. So before we talk about, well, in order to talk about whether or not Kenshin can actually atone for his crimes, we have to talk about the nature of justice. Um, there's really two aspects of justice that are applicable here. The first is proportionality or calculation. Um, Generally, when we think about whether or not something is just, we think about how the crime has to correspond to the punishment, right? So those two things have to be proportionate. And we also like to, have a calculation for that. So like if you commit this crime, you get X amount of years, something like that. And we would tend to say things like, giving a kid a life sentence for stealing candy from the corner store is fundamentally unjust, because the relationship between crime and punishment in that instance is disproportionate. The crime is the punishment is disproportionate to the crime. Um, the other aspect of justice that really applies here is this idea of restitution. The first part is, calculating the harm, and the second part is restitution. And so restitution, in the law, that's called making someone whole. In other words, when an injustice happens to someone, they have to be made whole in the eyes of the law. In other words, they have to be put back in the position they were in before the injustice occurred. So if you think about these two aspects of justice, it becomes quite clear that Kenshin really can't atone for the crimes that he's committed as a Hitokiri. And here's why. As an assassin, Kenshin's job is to kill people, right? But in order for him to atone for those crimes, he has to find, some punishment or some way of doing so that's proportionate to the crime that he's committed. But that's impossible. The reason being is because life is precisely that thing that we cannot calculate. It's invaluable. So whenever you try to think of, it's beyond calculation. So whenever we try to think of a punishment that would be just, that would fit that crime, we can't do it. We can't calculate what that punishment would be, because we think that taking a life is beyond calculation. A person's life is invaluable, and we understand that even if we say something like we should give this person the death penalty because they killed someone else, we have to understand that that's really not a that's really not a way of calculating what someone's life is worth, but it is a way of calculating sort of what this person has to pay. Even though we understand that a human life is beyond the concept of calculation or beyond the concept of value, because a human's life is invaluable. And also, there can't be any restitution in this case, The only way that there could be restitution in this case is if we brought those people back to life, which is impossible. You can't do it. Um, to atone for something means that you make amends or you offer reparations. The root word of reparations being reparative, in other words, to repair something. But unless you can bring a person back to life, you can't repair what you have done when you killed someone. You can't make that person whole again because there's no way to put them back in the position they were in before you committed the injustice against them. So basically, what we're left with is a situation where the premise of this manga is based on a fundamentally unanswerable question, right? Kenshin can't atone for these crimes. And what I really love about this manga is that Watsuki Nobuhiro gives us no easy answers, right? He forces the reader to think about the fundamental questions of life and forces us to consider the fact that some questions have no perfect answers. So, what are the answers that are available to Kenshin? And this is where we get really to the heart of the story and the heart of Kenshin's answer. And this is in chapter 246 where Kenshin in the chapter called answer. And so Yukishiro Inishi's um answer to Kenshin's dilemma of atonement is death. But like I said before, death is not a calculation of someone's life because the value of someone's life is in it's beyond calculation, and so that won't do. Also, if you kill the person, then it's impossible for that person to take moral responsibility, right? If you give someone the death penalty, then they can't atone because they can't take the first step towards atonement, which is taking moral responsibility for what they've done. And dead people have no responsibilities. It's as simple as that. So that's another reason why Yukishiro Inishi's answer just won't work. So Kenshin finally gives Yukishiro Inishi an answer. And it's may not be the perfect answer, but it's the best answer he has. And he says to Yukishiro Inishi um, something like, the answer to atoning for my crimes as a manslayer and as an assassin is to use the sword and my heart in fulfilling my struggling life. So basically, what this allows Kenshin to do is not to die and sort of escape the moral responsibility of what he's done, but to face his life and to struggle through this unanswerable question and to do it by constantly living a life in service to others. Making sure that the times are peaceful so that people can be happy and protecting the people that he loves. Now, in one sense, this answer that he gives to Anishi is sort of unsatisfactory for the reasons that I've outlined before. But on the other hand, it's really the best answer that we can get in this situation, and it's really a great piece of philosophy by Watsuki Nobuhiro because it's the best answer that I think is possible. So here's why. Part of what it means to be human is to fail is to fail at things because we're not perfect. But another part of what it means to be human is to wrestle with these fundamentally unanswerable questions that arise during the course of living our lives. And in this situation, I'm reminded of the philosopher Socrates. Um, if anyone's ever read Socrates' Apology, and knows the story of Socrates, basically what happened was that Socrates was brought up on trial on a whole bunch of bogus charges about corrupting the youth, and so Socrates is during Socrates' trial, he's allowed to defend himself, and part of his defense is that he makes a very famous statement: "The unexamined life is not worth living." Basically, what that means is that what makes us human is our reason, our rationality, and also what makes us human is our ability to wrestle with our emotions like love and like fear. And it seems to me that refusing to examine our lives, refusing to think about what it means to become a more just person, refusing to think about what it means to become a more ethical human being and a more politically conscious human being is equivalent to death. You might as well not be alive if you're not going to use your reason and rationality to think about what it means to become a better human being. And so that's the premise of the answer that Kenshin gives him, because he says, I have to struggle through my life using my sword and my heart to make this world a better place and to make myself a better human being. And so that's the premise of the answer that we get from Kenshin, and it's the premise of the answer that we get from Watsuki Nobuhiro. And this sort of is a parallel to what Aoshi Shinomori has done, because Kenshin has done the exact opposite. Whereas Aoshi Shinomori has used the memory of his fallen comrades to fuel his violence, Kenshin really turns Tomoe and the people that he's killed into a sort of memory of light. And yes, I stole that phrase, "a memory of light," from Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson's series, A Wheel of Time. But I think it's so apt and it's so beautiful here. He transforms their memory into a memory of light to sort of fuel this examination of his life, to sort of push him to take moral responsibility for what he's done as a manslayer, and to push him to think about what it means to become a more just and a more ethical and a more politically conscious human being. So um, this is those are all the reasons why I love the Kenshin, the Rurouni Kenshin manga, and why I think that it's the best shonen manga. It's the best because it really forces us to wrestle with these fundamentally unanswerable questions and to really think about what it means to be a good human being, an ethical human being, and the ways in which Watsuki Nobuhiro has done this by populating this series with psychologically and ethically complex antagonists and protagonists, and even secondary characters like Aoshi Shinomori and like Hajime Saito, and really explore different variations on this theme of the relationship between power and violence and corruption and psychological instability. When it comes to exploring the psychological complexities of the human mind, as far as I can tell, there is no one better at this than Watsuki Nobuhiro and in what he does in the Rurouni Kenshin manga. That's basically my review of the Rurouni Kenshin manga, and it's my explanation for why it's the best shonen manga that you can possibly read. And in addition to that, it has epic fights. The fight between Kenshin Himura and Makoto Shishio during the Kyoto arc is definitely a classic. When Kenshin Himura uses the succession technique, the Amakakuru Ryu no Hirameki, and Makoto Shishio blocks it, but then he gets pulled in by the vortex. Because Kenshin is moving so fast that he literally makes a vacuum in air and in space, and so it draws Shishio in. And so when Kenshin goes into the second part of the succession technique, it hurts Makoto Shishio twice as much because he's now being drawn to Kenshin. That fight between Hajime Saito and Himura Kenshin at the beginning of the Kyoto arc, where Hajime Saito takes that Gototsu stance and tells Kenshin, I deny your whole existence. Epic ass moment, and just for some epic ass fights, and for exploring the complexity of the human mind, and forcing us to consider what it means to be human. Um, I gotta give the Rurouni Kenshin manga a 10 out of 10. Hopefully you're not intimidated by the length of this video. And this is your boy uberhikari, a.k.a. the nerd nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.